state. I mean, it affects everything. And so I keep on forgetting to remind them to throw batteries into everything again. You know, they didn't do it over the break. So what we're going to do is finish up Descartes, and we saw that he finds his Archimedean point, his indubitable proposition. You know, the statement that can serve as sort of the central axiom for everything he wants to establish. Let me go. And of course, that turns out to be what we refer to as the cogito. If you want to sound like you know what you're doing in philosophy, refer to Descartes' proposition. It's simply the cogito. We all know what that is. You know, people think, oh boy, you know, this person knows what they're doing. Because that's what we professionals call it. But as I said, I am, I exist, turned out to be the central focus. And this, you know, this is, you say, well, you know, do we exist primarily as individuals? One of the students in the other class was covering some Karl Marx in one of her English classes, which is not too unusual. Sometimes the English professors are farther left than the philosophy professors. We're still looking for some bottom line truth. They're willing to be as radical as possible. You know, but one of the things that Marx tried to say is, hey, look, don't look to individual persons. Don't place them towards some individual persons. In fact, if you think that you want to, you know, structure your life around what you want to do for yourself and what you think is good for you, you know, that's wrong. You need to be what he calls a species being. You need to place the collective, whatever that collective turns out to be, the community, the state, the city, the central national government. You need to place that first. You need to place society first. Society is what's important. That's the only real individual unit for Marx. The individual, no. But people like Descartes and Locke are interested in in us as individual persons. What is our worth? You know, and later, I mean, for John Locke, what are the rights that attach to an individual? You know, so here's this abstract area. What does that have to do with my life? Well, it matters a lot. If you like to look at yourself as an individual, because we have found out that when we take every incentive away from individuals, you know, by you know, taxing them to death, people are saying, well, what's the hell am I working for? The government's going to take everything. You know, in Eastern Europe, they used to say, well, you know, in these Soviet factories, they would pretend to pay us and we would pretend to work. You know, but if everything, you know, what's the incentive of working if you're not going to better your own life? You know, if something is going to be taken from you and redistributed to somebody else. So, you know, so this idea that we're individuals might seem, oh, okay, all right, I I guarantee it. I mean, there's a whole strain in philosophy. We don't have time to cover everything. You know, this says, you know, we're not really individuals in the way that people like Descartes and Locke and Kant and the ancient philosophers like Socrates and Plato thought. You know, our identity is part of a collective. So Descartes in the meditation says, oh, here's my first truth. I am, I exist. If I'm being deceived about everything else, the one thing I can't be deceived about is I'm here to be deceived. So I must exist. If I'm doubting everything, the one thing I can't doubt is that I'm here to do the doubting. What is it? Eventually, I'm going to finish this roll for the day to pass around to you. Gosh, I was going up the steps to my office after having made a pot of coffee for everyone. Stumbled, fell halfway on my hand and the other, you know, on the steps and everything. There is a common misconception about coffee, by the way. Some people think that it's the caffeine in the coffee that wakes you up in the morning. But it's really spilling that piping hot coffee on your hands and the resultant pain that jars, you know, into alert. Oh my. So anyway, maybe it's God's way of saying you don't need as much coffee this morning as you think you do, Morowski. So here we get Descartes finally finding what he's looking for. That is the truth that's beyond doubt. Okay? That's his Archimedean point. That's what's going to serve for his system as what an axiom would in Euclid's plane geometry. Right? And we saw the way he expresses it elsewhere is cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But we professionals just talk about Descartes' statement here. Well, in the cogito, or, you know. So, you know, if you refer to it as that, somebody will think you really know what you're doing in philosophy. If you refer to Descartes' statement as the cogito. So, one of the places where Descartes cut out new ground, you know, made advances beyond what philosophers had done before him. I mean, after all, we saw that Socrates and Plato were talking about our having a soul that you know is in the body and might pre-existed and might even go on to exist after death. But Descartes tries to do more to describe what our immaterial self is. Because for Descartes, we're basically this immaterial soul in a material body. Now, the 20th century philosopher Gilbert Ryle used what he thought was a pejorative term, a negative term to refer to Descartes' position as the position of the ghost in the machine. In other words, for Descartes, we're an immaterial spirit or ghost in the machine of a material body, right? So he says he's not satisfied with just defining human being the way the ancients did as man's a rational animal. He says that's really not very informative, and it raises more questions than it answers. What do you mean by rational and animal? So what he does is
he tries to talk about the soul's nature, and we went over some of this before. So, but before he talks about the soul, he says, well, here are some of the characteristics of body. Now, note he doesn't say my body. The way, and I think I mentioned this last time, the way modern philosophers use the term body is it's kind of ambiguous. Sometimes they're referring to our physical bodies, but they also use body as a synonym for matter, for the stuff you and I have around us in this room, including what our bodies are made out of, for material substance. So these are the characteristics of matter: that it has shape, located space, occupies space to the exclusion of other bodies. And he knows that some of these are Newtonian properties, right? He knows what Newton said. It's perceivable by the senses, capable of motion in space, and Plato tried to talk about the difference. But he said, at this point in his philosophical arguments, he was led to question whether he has a body. So for Descartes, he is essentially an immaterial mind or soul. Remember, he said a deceiver could be deceiving me. I could be manufacturing all of my inner experiences, and I think they relate to an outside world. We looked at the Matrix, where a computer program is manufacturing a false world for those people in the pods, and they think it's a real world because that's all they know. And he says that everything might be fictitious. I might be dreaming it all. But I'm not going to dwell on this very much. But the point is, he can doubt his body. But what does he say is essential to him as a human being? Well, he says the property of thought. He says that's what's inseparable from his nature. If I should cease to think, then I should cease to exist. So strictly speaking, Descartes says the I in the I am, or I think, therefore I am, refers to a thinking thing, or a thing that thinks. So in other words, for Descartes, the essential properties of a material thing are location in space and the ability to, occupy space. He says after the wax is melted and all its properties change, the one thing that hasn't changed is its essential properties as a material thing, that it's located in space and occupies space. It's extended in space. But he says the chief property of a mind or soul is thought. Now you can say, how does this relate to the previous stuff? Well, now again, he elaborates on what he means by thinking. He doesn't just mean having an idea, but he says the mind has various processes going on: doubting, believing, understanding, imagining things, remembering things. This gave birth to an area called faculty psychology that predated psychology as an empirical science. In other words, the thought was that there are various processes or various faculties in us, memory, imagination, etc. And these are part of the mind. But now, think about this.
my old school Kentucky, I went there a year, is in the Final Four. All right. Now, think about that. Kentucky is in the Final Four. Yes. Think about something else. How about 2 plus 2 equals 4? Keep that thought. Now, is the thought that Kentucky is in the Final Four to the left or the right of the other thought, the 2 plus 2 equals? Or is it over or under it? Those terms don't even seem to apply to a thought. There's no such thing as one thought being to the left and right of another thought. Now, the point of bringing that up is, if you focus on something like that, you begin to see why he's trying to say that the immaterial Cartesian mind is not located in material Newtonian space. In other words, the property of a material object is that it's located and it occupies space in this Newtonian material world, universe. But thoughts and our immaterial mind, Descartes does not occupy space. And that's an important thing. So he says, our essential nature is thought, and thoughts aren't located in Newtonian space. Now, he says the body initially seems better known than the immaterial self or something. Right? I mean, think about it. Just common sense of it. If somebody asks you to sincerely doubt whether you have a body, most of you aren't going to be on board with that, right? I mean, you might say, well, yeah, Descartes raises theoretical doubt that we might be dreaming all this, or we might be in the matrix. But, common sense. I don't really doubt that I have a body. I don't really know. Say, but what about you're having a soul, an immaterial soul? You might say, well, except that's a matter of religious belief. I mean, that might be one way you go there. To say, I have confidence that I have an immaterial soul. What was your immaterial soul like? You know as well as you know what your body's like. You say, well, of course not. No, I can see and feel and touch and have my senses can put me in touch with my body, but even if I have a soul, it's kind of a matter of faith, and I'm not exactly sure what the properties of it are. Right? In other words, that's the way most of us would say, don't you think? I mean, well, why raise that? Well, Descartes says, well, to most people, this is the way it seems, that the body is better known than the immaterial soul or self because you can get in touch with your body by the senses, you can form mental images, by perception, parts of the body, whereas we don't have a mental image of the I or self. Hume later focuses on this to doubt, to cast skeptical doubts on the existence of the self. But for Descartes, that's not a problem. So Descartes would say, well, wait a second, here's something, the existence of which I can doubt, that I have a body, right?
demon might be deceiving me. I might be dreaming all this, you know. And we could add to that something like the Matrix could be going on in our own day. But he says, I know. My one central truth is that I have an immaterial soul. He says that's the one thing I can't have. So he says it would seem odd that I would have a more distinct grasp of something whose existence is doubtful, namely my material body, rather than my existing immaterial soul. So Descartes is trying to convince us, he's trying to stand on its head our normal way of looking at this. Most of us would say, I know that I have a body and its properties more than anything I know about the soul. Descartes is trying to convince us that we know more about the soul and are more sure of its existence than even that we have a body. So, he tries to say that the only way I really know something, even a material thing, is not by the senses, but by reason. You know, this is a central tenet of rationalism, and it goes all the way back to Plato. The idea that somehow our reason takes us directly to the truth and deeper into the truth than any of our senses can. Now, I said, if that seems odd to you, remember, you and I, you know, just in our public school system, I went to Baltimore City public school system, you know, first grade through 12th grade. We've been conditioned to be empiricists. We've been conditioned to think that if we have any knowledge, it's grounded on what the senses tell us, and that the best route to finding knowledge is through our five senses, or our senses aided with equipment like telescopes, microscopes, etc. But Descartes is trying to convince us that our reason gives us an in to ultimate reality that's beyond anything our senses could do. He says our senses would deceive us in our belief that the heated wax is not the same wax. I mean, take a piece of wax, right, and you heat it by the fire, right? All of its properties change, right? It had a yellow color before, now it's clear. It was hard before, and you could thump it and get a sound. Now it's kind of mushy, as you saw there. Or continue to heat it and make it and make it a liquid, and you can see things change even more. But he says, what tells me that it's the same wax? Descartes says, well, it can't be the senses, because all the properties that the wax now has after being heated are different from the properties it had before it was heated. So Descartes says, it must be my mind, my reason, that tells me that. Now, think about that. Not everybody buys what Descartes said. I have a hard time. Early on in grad school, I mean, when you're a grad student, you're pretty poor, right? You've taken a vow of poverty, you know, without being in a religious order, if you've taken a vow to go to grad school. And so, you know, save money sometimes and get a little treat. You know, sometimes I would make brownies from scratch. Now, if you really make brownies from scratch, you realize why some people call them fudge brownies. Because if you make the real thing, it almost tastes like fudge. I mean, I'm talking putting the flour in there. I'm talking heating unsweetened chocolate in a double boiler till it melts. You know, and combining it with sugar and, you know, flour, baking it. So you got 2 squares of unsweetened chocolate, and you put them in a pan, and you heat them, right? And I'm standing over the double boiler because I don't want anything. I'm just watching me. So now I got a puddle of melted chocolate in the bottom of the double boiler. Now Descartes wants to tell me now, Vic, if I ask you, Vic, is that chocolate in the bottom of the double boiler the same chocolate as those 2 squares you put in? I'd say, yes, Descartes, it is. And he'd say, you know how you know that? It's not by anything your senses tell you, Vic. It's by what your reason and your immaterial mind wait a second, Descartes. How? I just stood here and watched those things melt. And you're telling me that it's not my senses that give me confidence that it's the same chocolate, but something else. Sorry, Descartes. I'm afraid I can't buy into this. But at any rate, Descartes' trying to say that our reason helps us to know even the material world and better than our senses. So he says awareness of the self is truer and more certain than the existence of the wax. Now, I'm not going to go into the details on this slide, but just look at basically what he's trying to say is if I try to affirm the existence of the wax and its properties, every statement I make to affirm something about the wax also affirms something about my own existence. If I say the wax exists because I see it, then I have to exist and be able to perceive things. If I say the wax exists because I touch it, I have to exist to have feelings of touch. If I say, here when he says imagine it, that's the way he means forming a mental image of it. I mean, if I look at those, the piece of wax and I have a mental image of it because I'm looking at it. He says if I say the wax exists because I perceive it with my eyes, form a mental image of it, then I have to exist. So he says everything that affirms the existence of a piece of matter, like your body or like even a piece of wax, affirms the existence, your own existence as an immaterial soul. Now, again, we don't. So he says if material things are known not by the senses but in being understood by the intellect alone, then the mind is known even better that way. Now, here's one problem. I can think, I'm going to pick up my coffee cup and take a drink of coffee. Or a mental event causes me to do a physical event. Or, when I stumble there, I spill some hot coffee on my hands. A physical event, namely having hot coffee spill on my hands, caused a mental event, being in pain. Right? I mean, that's not news to anyone here, right? We all think that whatever we are, that mental events cause physical events, and physical events can cause mental events. Causation works both ways. The trick, and what gives rise to what is known as the Cartesian mind-body problem is, and it's a problem from dualism, is basically if matter and mind are so different, how do they interact? How can you explain their interaction in Descartes' terms? Well,
how did Descartes do it? Anybody pick that up in the video? Now, a lot of things go by in these videos, so I'm not going to get down on you, sort of like pass it. Because it might have seemed kind of strange anyway. Descartes claims that the pineal or pineal gland, a gland at the base of the brain, is of such subtle matter that it's through the pineal gland that mind and body interact. The phrase, which I'm not going to ask you, is called, they're the locus of interaction, the location of interaction takes place between mind and body. Why is this a problem for Descartes? Well, remember, thoughts, Cartesian minds, are not in Newtonian space. When I filled up that coffee pot this morning, or maybe a better way of saying it is I heated some water for coffee before I left. If I turned the gas stove on, but left the water across the room, the gas would not heat the stove, right? If the cue ball didn't hit the 8 ball, it's not going to cause it to roll. We think that causes need to operate, causes and effects need to operate because they're next to each other in space. Well, Cartesian minds aren't even located in space. So it's a real problem for Descartes. And posing the pineal gland just kicks the problem back one more level. Because Descartes because you said, well, what is the pineal gland anyway at the base of the brain if it isn't also a material object? And he says it's more subtle matter, but it's still matter located in space. So Descartes has as much of a problem explaining how the immaterial mind can affect anything in the pineal gland as he does in explaining how the immaterial mind can affect anything in the rest of the body. And of course there is also this Newtonian view that the total amount of matter and energy in the universe is a constant. Matter is neither created nor destroyed, but it changes form. But it seems like you're putting energy into the system and causing things to happen in the material world by the immaterial mind. And how does that square with basic Newtonian principles? So the mind-body problem was a real problem for dualism. Well, I'm not going to have time to show the video. Let me talk about where Descartes tries to go from here, just in very broad terms. Okay, you say, how is he going to construct a whole system of philosophy and knowledge on this one statement, I think, therefore I am? Right? How is he going to do it? Well, we're not getting too much into that, but here's what he does. He looks at this statement, I think, therefore I am. And he says, well, what is it about it that makes it obviously and necessarily true? And what he does, the 20th century philosopher Richard Rorty did a very good job at pointing this out. He uses a visual metaphor. What makes it necessarily true is clarity and distinctness.
a very, very easy way to illustrate that. Have you ever, like at home, use an old, like, slide projector? Or maybe you've seen in elementary school or something, your teacher tried to show a film strip and it was out of focus. Or we know if that thing's in focus right now, right? That's part of what IP does, so they can collect pages, right? Keep stuff like that in focus. Well, no. These letters are clear because they're in focus, and they're also distinct from one another. You can see the S, the M, the ART, right? What would happen if we got it out of focus? No, now it would not be clear, and you know what happens? Things bleed into one another if they're out of focus. So the letters would no longer be distinct from one another. So he uses this visual metaphor that we can see the truth of the Cogito right offhand. Well, how does Descartes try to get us out? Because see, right now, this is why he has to use the ontological argument to prove God. Because right now he doesn't even know at this stage in his philosophical meditations, he doesn't even know if his body exists or the material world exists or if anyone else besides him exists. And Descartes has to try to show from knowing only that he exists, I am, I think, therefore I exist. How does it get to the existence of other things? Well, what he tries to do is prove the existence of God, and he has to do it a priori by something like the ontological argument. He can't use something like the design argument that needs observations about the world to prove God, because right now he doesn't even know if the world exists. At least philosophically, he can't defend that. So he proves God's existence and that God has the traditional properties of God, among them being that God is morally perfect and benevolent. And so he says, if I prove God's existence by something like the ontological argument, which we already looked at, and God is no deceiver, well, think about it. Can I have confidence in the first stuff that I doubted? Like what my senses tell me about what's going on in this room. Well, Descartes says, if God made me such that I think there's a real table here, and there isn't, either I'm dreaming all the time, or a malicious demon, an evil genius is deceiving me into thinking there's a table, or even God. He says if God allowed that to happen, he would, in a sense, be a deceiver, and that would be against God's moral qualities, his moral perfection. So God is no deceiver, and so when I think there's a real table in front of me, there is. So that's how he tries to get back everything else, by first proving the existence of a God who's no deceiver, and then saying that God can give him confidence that he has knowledge about other things, that there really is a material world, that he has a real body, that he's not dreaming, he's not being deceived by a demon. So you say, well, he gets back everything at the end that he doubted at the beginning. Did I go wrong? What's real? Okay. You say, well, what has happened? I mean, what's different? Now he's got back everything he doubted. But now he's trying to say,
Now, you have much more confidence that you really know these things because you deduce them from first principles like the Cogito. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the crucial move. He looks at the Cogito, sees the clarity and distinctness as the mark of a necessary truth, and he looks into his mind to see if he has any other ideas that have the same mark. And he finds his perfect idea of God, which for rationalists is innate. Okay? And so he says, well, my idea of God must be necessarily true too, because it also is clear and distinct. Here's the problem. This is often called the Cartesian circle. This is why Descartes did not settle everything. You say, Descartes, how do I know that that the ideas I perceive clearly and distinctly are necessarily true? Descartes would say, well, a God exists and guarantees that what you perceive clearly and distinctly is necessarily true. That's the way he's made you. But wait a second, Descartes, how do I know that there's a God who exists and is never deceived? Descartes would say, well, I can prove the existence of God from my necessarily true, clear and distinct ideas. He needs the ideas to be true to prove God's existence and that God is no deceiver. He needs God to be around to guarantee that the ideas are true. So the whole approach that he has goes in one big circle. It's one big circular argument, and it doesn't really prove what he wants to prove. And so that's one reason why Descartes didn't settle everything in philosophy. His whole program is one big circular argument, and a circular argument proves nothing. You're taking for granted what you need to be proving instead of proving it in a circular argument. So the empiricists inherited a couple of things. They inherited the view that Descartes didn't quite get it done. But they also inherited the view that the mind is first acquainted with its inner mental life. But they rejected Descartes' way out. We'll see this next time. Because they rejected innate ideas. Descartes' idea of God, that he needs to get himself out of the dilemma that the only thing he can show is that he exists alone. He needs that innate idea of God, but for the empiricists, all of our ideas, all of our knowledge comes after birth from what the senses perceive. We don't have any innate ideas. So the empiricists cannot use Descartes' way out, and his way out was circular anyway. So that's one reason why we'll see empiricism ended up in a lot of skepticism about what we can know. Okay, I don't want to make you late for your next class, because that is clear and distinct. And we know that that's true. So, look, we're going to go to the empiricists next. I'm going to show video on that, and we'll go to a PowerPoint on British empiricism. If you missed the role, it's up here.